8 seconds. That's how long I let them clap before I destroyed everything they thought they knew. My name is Chloe Harper. I'm 32 years old. And on the night of my own wedding, in front of 120 guests, my sister took the microphone and told the room I had faked my miscarriage for attention. My mother stood up, raised her champagne, and said, "Someone had to say it, honey." My father clapped. Not fast. Not slow. Just the way he claps when he doesn't know what else to do. And the whole room clapped with them. I sat there. I let it happen. 8 full seconds of silence, while my family congratulated itself for humiliating me at my own reception. Then I stood up, took the microphone from my sister's hand, and said, "Before you keep celebrating, let me read you the text my sister sent my mother at 1:47 in the morning. The night I lost my baby." My mother shot out of her chair. "Just read what she wrote," she said. "Don't read when she wrote it." The entire room went silent. They had no idea those 8 seconds were the moment I started tearing their whole story apart. But to understand what happened in that barn, you need to go back. Back to a river in Michigan, long before I ever loved the man I married, and long before I understood exactly what my mother had been building. I met Owen Caldwell on a kayak trip. My best friend Rachel, a teacher at the school next door to mine, had decided without asking me that I needed to meet a civil engineer she knew from Detroit. That afternoon on the Huron River, Owen's sunglasses slipped off his kayak into the water. Without thinking, I flipped mine over, dove down, and came up holding them in my fist. He laughed. The kind of laugh a person gives when they've already decided something. I remember thinking, this one knows when to laugh. And right behind that thought, another one, uglier and quieter. My sister once let my grandmother's ring sink to the bottom of a swimming pool when I was 8 years old, and she never once went in after it. 3 weeks later, I brought Owen home for Sunday dinner. My sister Peyton looked at him a few seconds too long in the hallway before she smiled and stepped aside. I told myself it meant nothing. She was 30. She was allowed to notice a handsome man in the house. I didn't tell Owen I'd been counting the seconds. By that summer, he was down on one knee in the arboretum, and I was crying too hard to say yes for almost a full minute. Within weeks, he'd sold his condo to put everything into a down payment on a home we hadn't even found yet. And in the meantime, we moved into my parents' house. "Just temporary," my mother said. "Just until you find your forever place. It'll be like old times." There was a step on that staircase that had been loose since I was 10 years old. My father always meant to fix it. He never did. It creaked in a very specific way, and it would take me months to understand that my mother had memorized that creak completely. From her bedroom, she always knew exactly which floorboards I'd crossed, and at what hour. Then Owen came home one evening and told me his company was relocating him to Grand Rapids by the following summer. When I told my mother at dinner, she went quiet. Then she got up, walked to the hall closet, and came back with a photo album from when I was 5 years old, an album she hadn't touched in years, and started telling a long story about how I used to cry every morning of kindergarten. Owen squeezed my hand under the table. He didn't say a word, but he noticed the shift in the room the way an engineer notices a wall settle wrong. That same season, my sister's marriage to Kyle Redmond ended. She told the family Kyle lacked ambition. Kyle told me something different, the day he came by for his last boxes. She stopped telling me the truth about small things, he said. I never figured out why she needed to. My mother turned on the vacuum while he said his goodbyes. Peyton laughed. Later, I would understand exactly what that laugh meant. One night that November, unable to sleep, I came downstairs for water and found my mother and my sister sitting together in the dark. I heard the words Grand Rapids. And I heard my sister say, "We don't have to let it." I stood frozen on that loose step and went no further. The next morning I told Owen my mother and sister seemed to be developing a shared hobby. He asked what hobby. I didn't have an answer yet. I only knew, somewhere underneath, that something was already moving against me. 2 weeks later, I found out I was pregnant. We told both families on Christmas Eve. Owen's mother, Diane, a retired nurse with a voice like warm water, cried and hugged me and told me to take my prenatal vitamins at the same time every morning. My mother stood up too fast and asked if it was really the right time. My sister raised her glass to, quote, the little accident, then quickly corrected herself when no one laughed. My father squeezed Owen's shoulder and told him he'd be a good father. My mother crushed a napkin ring in her fist through the entire toast, then disappeared into the kitchen for 12 minutes. The following month, she announced a new family tradition. Weekly dinners, every Sunday, all of us together, before Grand Rapids could take me away. She told a story about an imaginary childhood friend of mine I had no memory of ever having. Chloe was always the imaginative one, she said, buttering her roll. Peyton was always the honest one. That night, drying dishes at the sink, my sister leaned in and murmured, low enough for only me to hear, enjoy this while it lasts. A few days later, my mother handed me a small wooden box tied in butcher paper. Morning nausea tea, she said. All natural. Her upline swore by it. I set it on the shelf. I looked up the company later. Multi-level marketing wellness tea. I meant to say something. I never did. When the nausea got bad enough that even toast wouldn't stay down, I brewed a cup anyway. It tasted like dirt and licorice. I drank it every morning for the next 3 weeks. At the end of January, Owen and I put an offer on a 2-bedroom house in Grand Rapids with a nursery that caught the north light. The offer was accepted. Closing was set for the 22nd of May. When I told my mother, she went quiet for exactly 6 seconds, said how lovely, and refilled my teacup. Twice that night. I didn't notice at the time. I only remembered it later. The next Sunday, my mother and sister spent 40 minutes standing in the freezing driveway, breath clouding in the cold, talking. I saw them while walking the family dog and kept walking. Our elderly neighbor, Maggie, a retired librarian, saw them too, from her kitchen window. She'd installed a doorbell camera the year before after people kept cutting through her driveway. That night she wrote in her journal, Sylvia and Peyton in the driveway, 40 minutes, crying at one point, voices raised. If she goes to Grand Rapids, we lose her. The following week, at the mailbox, Maggie overheard fragments of another conversation between my mother and sister, close enough that they hadn't bothered to lower their voices around the old woman collecting flyers. She wrote those fragments down too. The tea is doing what tea does. We still have 4 months. At the time, she thought it was a comment about slow multi-level marketing sales. She underlined it anyway, because a librarian underlines what she doesn't understand. That same week, Owen's uncle passed away in Detroit, and Owen left to attend the funeral. Before he drove off, he stood at our bedroom door and told me to call if anything felt wrong. I told him I'd call if I so much as sneezed strangely. He kissed my forehead. He kissed my stomach. Then he was gone. 2 days later, I drank the last cup from the second box of tea. My mother had already bought me a third. By 10 that night, I was bleeding. I called Owen. No answer. I went downstairs on that same loose step and found my father in the living room, watching the news with the sound turned low. Dad, I need to go to the hospital. He didn't ask why. He just stood up and grabbed his keys. He got me to St. Joseph Mercy Hospital in 14 minutes, and he didn't speak again until we crossed the intersection near Washington Street. Then he said, "You're going to be all right." I didn't believe him, but I took his hand, and he squeezed it 3 times. In our family, 3 squeezes always meant I'm here. He'd used it the year my grandmother died. He was using it now. I was taken into room 12. The nurse who admitted me wasn't my sister. Her name was Sanders, calm and careful the way emergency nurses learn to be. My father sat in the waiting room and, out of some old habit, Texted my mother instead of calling. Come to St. Joe's, he wrote. She didn't answer. He sent it again. At 12:35, my mother arrived at the hospital. She did not walk into the waiting room. She parked in the structure across the street and sat in her car with the engine running and the heater on. My father wouldn't learn any of this for another 4 months. At 1:47 in the morning, my sister, an emergency room nurse of 6 years, working that same shift, walked past my door for the second time. She did not come in. She was not on my care team. She stood at the nurse's station where she could see the whiteboard listing my room, my name, and the shorthand for what was happening to me. She took a photograph. It caught the door number and the edge of that whiteboard. 2 seconds later, she sent it to my mother, along with a message asking whether they should stick to the plan from the previous Sunday or wait until after the baby shower to make it, quote, a better story. My mother read that message sitting in her idling car in the hospital parking structure. She sat with it for 2 minutes. Then, at 1:49 exactly, she typed back, wait, let her heal. Better story if she's back on her feet. People won't feel bad for her once she's smiling in photos again. She read her own words twice. Turned off the dome light. Sat for 3 more minutes. Then she drove home. In the morning, she'd tell my father she'd spent the night calling family members who deserved to know. At 2:10 a.m., the doctor confirmed what I already knew. I didn't cry in front of him. I cried after he left. My father was allowed in at 2:25, and he sat beside me and squeezed my hand 3 times. Owen arrived at 3:05 with snow still melting in his hair and stood at the foot of my bed for 2 full minutes without speaking, holding both my hands, before he finally said, I should have been here. Diane arrived not long after, carrying a blanket from her own bed. She'd been my mother-in-law for 8 weeks. She sat down without asking, put her hand on my ankle, and said absolutely nothing. She knew enough not to. I was discharged the next morning. My mother met us at the curb and hugged me too tightly, too long. Her hair was dry. She smelled like fresh shampoo. She did not smell like a woman who had spent the night crying. I filed that fact away in the part of my mind where I keep the things I'm not ready to use yet. For 6 weeks, my mother brought food to my room every single day. On the 4th day, she brought a different tea. This one's for after, she said. I thanked her. I never drank it. I poured it into the orchid on my windowsill instead. Within 8 days, the orchid was dead. My sister visited twice that first week. She never once asked how I was feeling. She talked about her divorce. She talked about a patient she'd saved on shift. She left me a note with a heart sticker that read, Love you, sis. I photographed the note before I threw it away. I still don't fully know why. 3 weeks later, my mother restarted the Sunday dinners and started telling a new kind of story in front of Owen, old childhood memories, all with the same shape, all designed to make me sound like someone who exaggerated, who cried wolf, who made small things enormous. She told a version of it 4 Sundays running. By the 5th, Owen had grown quieter. I later found a text he'd sent his sister. I don't want to say this, but sometimes I wonder if she's more fragile than I thought. His sister wrote back within a minute, She just lost a baby, Owen. Fragile is not a flaw. He didn't respond to her. Instead, he took an unnecessary work trip. When he came home, he was gentler with me, but it was the gentleness of a man protecting something he no longer fully trusted. Somewhere in that 5th week, I decided something. We would keep the wedding date. I wasn't going to let them take that too. When I told Owen, my mother's relief was immediate, and that same night, she suggested Peyton give the maid of honor toast. It'll be healing, sweetheart, she said. She's your sister. I said no. She pushed. Owen, gently, asked me to let her. It might help, he said. I told him okay. But I marked that moment down right next to the shampoo, right next to the tea poured twice, right next to the imaginary friend I never had. I had started noticing things. I didn't know yet exactly what I was looking for. I only knew I was looking. In late March, while gathering old photo albums for the wedding slideshow, I went up to my childhood bedroom, now my mother's sewing room, while she was out. The albums were exactly where she'd said. But underneath them, in a drawer I hadn't opened since I was 19, I found something else. 2 boxes of that tea. And beside them, in a sealed plastic bag, a bottle of my own prenatal vitamins. The bottle I'd supposedly finished in January. Nearly full. I sat down on the floor and did the math. For the first 5 weeks of my pregnancy, every morning, I had taken a pill from that bottle, believing it was medicine. It wasn't. Same size. Same color. Different logo entirely. A generic herbal supplement, not a prenatal vitamin at all. I searched further and found a stack of training materials from the tea company. Buried near the bottom was a laminated sheet titled Contraindications. Please review before client consultations. 3 ingredients were highlighted in yellow. Blue cohosh. Dong K. Senna. The heading above them read, "Not recommended during pregnancy, may stimulate uterine activity." In the margin, in my mother's handwriting, were 4 small dashes. Not check marks. Dashes. As if she'd been counting something. I photographed the page. Downstairs, my mother was rinsing lettuce. I asked casually if she still had any of those tea pamphlets. A friend was curious. She said she'd thrown them all out years ago. That business wasn't for her. I told her they seemed a little scammy anyway. She laughed and agreed. I went back upstairs and searched blue cohosh and miscarriage online. The first result, from a pregnancy health organization, confirmed exactly what the pamphlet warned. I closed the laptop. I decided, somewhere between closing that laptop and falling asleep, that I would never accuse my mother of causing my miscarriage outright. I would never know for certain what had caused it. But I knew, with complete certainty, exactly what she had put into my hand. In early April, our elderly neighbor Maggie invited me over for real tea chamomile, from a proper tin, in a cracked porcelain pot mended with a fine line of gold. Kintsugi, she told me. It means broken things are more beautiful once you can see where they broke. Over her tea, she asked gently if my mother was all right. She'd noticed her cutting through the neighboring driveway at night for months, always heading toward the back gate. My sister's bedroom window faced that side of the house, and Maggie assumed my mother was avoiding some private argument with my father. Then she asked if I wanted to see what her journal actually said, and pulled out her tablet, showing me 3 separate clips from her doorbell camera, my mother, at night, on 3 different dates, cutting through that same driveway. I asked Maggie to sit at table 11 at my wedding. As my guest, I told her. Not my family's. When she asked why table 11, I told her, because that's where I'm putting the people I actually trust. I called Rachel that same evening and told her almost everything I'd pieced together. She didn't ask if I was sure. She only asked what she could do. Sit at table 11, I told her. If I stand during the toasts, walk toward me. Not toward my mother. Toward me. Done, she said. What I still needed were the 2 texts, the timestamps, and the photograph attached to the first one, which I'd never actually seen. I had no access to my sister's phone, and I wasn't going to hack anyone. Then I remembered Kyle. During his divorce from Peyton, his lawyer had requested a full export of her text message archive as part of standard discovery. He'd kept the file on a drive in a bank box and never opened it. I texted him, and he replied within minutes, said he'd been waiting 3 years to be useful to someone in my family, and sent me the encrypted file that same evening, asking only that I never mention where it came from. I agreed. He added one more line before signing off. For the record, I always believed you about the baby. Peyton told me you were making a big deal out of it the week after. That's the moment I knew we were done. I opened the file and searched the date. There it was. The full thread. My sister's message and the photograph attached to it. My mother's reply. I read all of it, again and again, until I'd stopped crying and started planning. I never showed Owen the file. I decided he would hear the truth in the same room as everyone else, so he'd never have to privately choose between his family and mine. A few weeks before the wedding, he sat on our bed and asked me quietly whether I believed I'd lost the baby. I asked him back whether he believed I'd lost the baby the way I told him I had. He paused for an uncomfortably long time, then said yes. I kissed his forehead and went to sleep. He stayed out in the living room another 20 minutes before he came up. At the rehearsal dinner, my sister stood, tapped her glass, and announced that she wasn't giving her real toast yet, but that she'd been working on it for weeks, and that I deserved it. She smiled. Owen looked at his glass. Rachel caught my eye across the candles and looked away. Afterward, in the parking lot, my father asked me to walk with him while he had a cigarette, something he only ever did when he was afraid. He told me that the morning after I came home from the hospital, he'd asked my mother directly where she had been that night. She told him she was making calls. If you know something different, he said quietly, I already suspect it. I hugged him. I didn't answer. That night, Owen sat on the edge of our bed and told me something felt off, that he didn't know what my family was doing, but that whatever happened tomorrow, he was on my side. I told him only to watch. The ceremony was the next afternoon. My father walked me down the aisle without a word, just 3 squeezes of my hand. I squeezed back 3 times. Owen stood waiting at the front in a charcoal suit, and when I reached him, I told him what I'd written the week before. You loved me on the days I could not carry hope. That's the marriage I'm marrying. My mother wept theatrically in the front pew. I didn't look at her. The reception opened at a converted barn outside town, strung with warm lights, 120 guests seated beneath restored beams. In my small silver clutch, I carried 3 things: my lipstick, my phone with the screenshots, and a single folded sheet of paper with both texts, both timestamps, and the photograph of room 12 printed clean and undeniable. Rachel had a small wooden tea box tucked in her coat pocket. After the main course, the DJ tapped his microphone and introduced the maid of honor. My sister stood in navy satin, hair curled loose, holding the microphone like someone who had rehearsed. She opened with 2 safe jokes about growing up together. The room laughed. My mother laughed loudest. My father did not laugh at all. Then she paused 3 seconds too long, and I felt the shift the way you feel weather changing. She said she had to be honest, because that's what maids of honor are for. She said I had always been the imaginative one. She said that a few months ago, I'd told the family I'd had a miscarriage and that some of them had struggled with that story. And then, glancing at our mother for permission, she said she sometimes thought I needed the attention more than I needed the truth. The room froze. My mother stood, raised her glass, and said loud enough for every table to hear, someone had to say it, honey. My father clapped. Once. Twice. 6 times. Then he stopped. Owen never clapped at all. And the room applauded around them anyway. I sat there. I let it happen. 8 full seconds, while my mother tapped her glass against my sister's, while my father's hands slowed to a stop, while Diane set down her dessert fork without looking away from me, while Rachel rose from table 11 with her hand already on Maggie's shoulder, while Maggie opened her notebook flat on the tablecloth, like evidence entering a courtroom. Then I stood. I didn't look at my sister. I crossed the floor, reached out my hand, and she placed the microphone into it without thinking. She hadn't rehearsed this part. I stepped up under the lights and let the room wait. Then I said, calmly, before you keep celebrating, let me read you the text my sister sent my mother at 1:47 in the morning, the night I lost my baby. My mother was out of her chair before I'd even finished the sentence. Her napkin hit the floor. Just read what she wrote, she said, voice cracking. Don't read when she wrote it. I looked at the room. I want everyone here to notice what she just said, I told them. She hasn't heard a single word of that text yet. I only mentioned the time. But she already knows exactly what my sister wrote because she read it live at 1:47 in the morning while I was lying in room 12 at St. Joseph Mercy. A woman who only heard about a text the next day, the way she told my father she did, doesn't know to correct what against when. Only someone reading it in real time knows to make that distinction. My mother opened her mouth. Nothing came out. I unfolded the paper and read it aloud. She's here. Room 12. Miscarriage confirmed. Do we go with the plan from last Sunday or wait until after the shower? Attached to that message, I told them, was a photograph of my hospital room door and the whiteboard behind the nurse's station, taken from inside the hospital by a registered nurse on duty that night. That nurse is standing right here beside me. My sister didn't deny it. She reached for the gift table to steady herself. I told the room I'd thought for months about what plan from last Sunday meant, because that Sunday was one full week before I lost the baby. Meaning whatever story they intended to tell tonight had been decided before my miscarriage ever happened. Not after. My mother sank back into her chair. I read the second text. Sent from her car in the hospital parking structure, 1 minute and 40 seconds after the first. Wait, let her heal. Better story if she's back on her feet. People won't feel bad for her once she's smiling in photos again. That message, I said, was sent while I was miscarrying inside that building, while my father sat in the waiting room believing she was out making calls to family who deserved to know. My father stood. He didn't need a microphone. Sylvia, he said, I asked you that morning where you'd been. You told me you were making calls. You were in that parking structure. You were reading a text about our daughter. I'm going to stop clapping now. Rachel crossed the floor and set the small wooden tea box on the table beside me. I told the room what my mother had given me at 7 weeks pregnant, told them safe, and I told them exactly what was highlighted in yellow on the company's own warning sheet. I don't know what caused my miscarriage, I said. No one ever fully does. But I know what she handed me. And I know what she highlighted before she did. My sister spoke without a microphone, voice breaking. Mom, I told you we should have waited. My mother snapped at her to be quiet. Peyton kept going anyway. You said this was the best time. You said the room would move on. Then she stopped and looked at the floor. Diane crossed to stand at my right side. Owen came from the head table to stand at my left. I raised the microphone one last time and told the room there was more. A neighbor's journal going back to October, a driveway conversation about not letting me move, an exchange at a mailbox in February, but that I wasn't going to read any of it tonight. I wasn't going to turn my wedding into a courtroom. Anyone who wanted to know more could ask me privately. My mother pleaded that I was misunderstanding everything, that she hadn't known about the tea, that the pamphlet was old, that the text had been clumsy. I didn't react. I told her she could call, she could write, she could drive to Grand Rapids once we'd moved, and that I would decide, from now on, when the door opened. That's not your decision anymore, I said. Then I handed the microphone back. No music played. No one applauded. There was no script for that room, and silence turned out to be the only thing that fit. Owen and I walked out together. My father was already outside, alone in the wet field behind the barn, hands in his pockets, looking older than he had that morning. He told me he was sorry, 6 weeks too late, and that he was moving into the workshop that night. I didn't hug him. I nodded. Owen waited until my father had turned away before he told me he'd let my mother make him doubt me for weeks in March and April, and that he should have believed me completely from the start. He was crying quietly, the way an engineer cries when he discovers a structural flaw in something he built with his own hands. I told him he'd just told me the truth. He said that wasn't enough. I told him it wasn't, but that he was here. He took my hand and squeezed it 3 times. I'd only ever taught him that signal once, the week before I lost the baby. He'd been using it instinctively ever since the night he walked into that hospital room with snow in his hair. Diane found us in the grass and told me she'd been at the hospital at 3:30 that night, that she had always known I'd lost the baby, and that I should never have had to prove it to anyone in that family. I cried softly for the first time all evening. Maggie asked if I wanted her to keep the notebook. Keep it, I told her, in case anyone ever needs it. We didn't go back inside. We walked around to the parking lot together while a slow piano song played somewhere behind us for whoever in that room still needed it. It didn't need to be me. The next morning, my phone rang 4 times before 9 a.m. I didn't answer any of them. My sister texted that she needed to talk. I didn't reply to that either. On Monday, I called the hospital's patient privacy office and reported, factually and without a single unnecessary word, that a nurse on shift had photographed patient signage and sent it outside the hospital for personal reasons. By Tuesday, my sister had been suspended pending investigation. I didn't celebrate. I made a bowl of oatmeal. Within days, the story moved through our town the way stories move through small towns, through the school, through the church, through the business community that had once ordered flowers from my mother's shop. Within 48 hours, she'd lost 6 event orders. By the following Sunday, a sign went up in her shop window, closed for inventory. I still don't know if it was ever meant to reopen. On the day our new house closed, my father called from the workshop to tell me he wasn't moving back in, that my mother had asked and he'd said no, that my sister had already moved out to stay with a friend. I told him I wasn't ready to say I forgave him, only that I heard him. That's more than I deserve, he said, and hung up before I had to. A few days later, Call texted to say he'd heard about the suspension and that he didn't feel triumphant, only relieved that someone had finally believed him about the small things she used to hide. I thanked him for the backup, in every sense of the word. When we packed the last of our things out of that house, I carried the tea box 3 doors down and handed it to Maggie. In case they ever try to say I lied, I told her. She took it gently and told me they never would because they already knew the truth. We drove west to Grand Rapids the next day. Newly planted cornfields rolling past the window. I didn't say much. Owen played the radio low. Our new house was smaller than my parents', 3 bedrooms, and a nursery with a soft watercolor harp my father had painted on the wall back in March, before any of this had come to light. We stood in the doorway together. We'll paint over it when we're ready, I told him. Not before, he agreed. That first night, we slept on a mattress on the floor, in a house that was quiet in a way my mother's house never once had been. There was no loose stair to listen for. A few weeks later, I sat on our back porch with a real cup of tea, not the other kind, and wrote an email to my mother that I didn't send that day. I told her I wasn't calling, that if she wanted to reach me, she could write a real letter, and if the first one named the specific things she'd done, I would read the second. If it didn't, I wouldn't. I closed the laptop. I looked down at the ring on my finger and said, out loud, to no one but myself, I am 32 years old. I lost a baby. I married a man who doubted me once and learned to believe me completely. I left a house that used to be mine. I'm living in a house that isn't fully mine yet, but I know I will. I finished my tea, walked outside, and joined my husband in the sun. Boundaries were never cruelty. They were simply the shape of who I finally decided to become.